Hey folks, over the last few weeks I've thoroughly tested 85 to 90 leveling in MoP Classic, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it will be a fairly time-consuming process. That being said, in this video I'll showcase the most efficient route that I've been using, and I'll explain multiple tricks that you can use to save time on your journey. All of my testing runs were done solo with 0 pre-quests, so the route that I'll show you in this video doesn't require any prior knowledge or preparation, and it also works for all classes and both factions. Also, while your first time leveling through MoP may feel pretty slow due to a lack of flying, Blizzard has solved this issue for alts in the Classic re-release. After reaching level 90 for the first time, you can purchase an account-bound tome in your faction's major city, which allows your alts to learn Pandaria flying immediately at level 85. This won't change the recommended route within my video, it'll just shave off potentially hours of travel time and make the existing strategy even faster. With all that out of the way, let's jump into the leveling guide. Before we discuss the recommended path in each zone, I want to address the often asked question of how dungeon spamming compares to questing. The short answer is that if you were to dungeon spam the entirety of the way from 85 to 90, it would be significantly slower than pure questing. However, this answer misses a lot of the nuance. For starters, you should always aim to complete each dungeon at least a single time, as they all have a bunch of one-time quests that grant a significant chunk of experience, as well as guaranteed gear upgrades. You should still be queuing via the random dungeon finder instead of specific queue, as this rewards you with a bonus chunk of XP. If you end up in a duplicate dungeon that you don't like, you can always leave and continue questing. Generally speaking, the efficiency of pure dungeon spam falls off really hard towards the end of the leveling process. I'll discuss the reasons for this a bit more in the later sections of this video, but it's important to note that dungeon spamming is a relatively viable option for the very first level, 85 to 86. This is due to a combination of multiple factors. For starters, the only two dungeons that you'll initially have access to are Temple of the Jade Serpent and Stormstout Brewery, both of which are arguably the most efficient MoP leveling dungeons. In fact, some people even prefer solo farming the trash in these dungeons as a way to level up, and although that's a fairly advanced strategy that usually requires you to be an experienced tank player, it goes to show how efficient these two dungeons are even if you're running them in a group of 5. These dungeons will also reward you with 410 item level gear, and this will likely be a noticeable stat boost for anyone jumping into Pandaria directly from Cataclysm leveling. Although MoP has a few different vendors that lets you purchase powerful gear immediately upon entering a new zone, you won't encounter the one in Jade Forest until halfway through the questline. This means that your early quest leveling will be extra slow if you have crappy gear, but spamming dungeons for the first level will bypass this problem entirely. The final reason why dungeon spam tends to be good for this first level is because Jade Forest is a really crappy questing zone, by far the worst in Pandaria. In a moment, I'll discuss why this is the case, and I'll also go over my recommended questing path if you would rather not run dungeons for this level. Real quick though, I want to remind you that the Darkmoon Faire XP buff is finally available in Mists of Pandaria, and you should make sure to grab it whenever the fair is active. The Darkmoon Faire is available every 2 weeks in Classic, and you can tell if it's up by checking your in-game calendar. If it's active, you can speak with a Darkmoon mage in one of your faction's major cities to be teleported directly to the fair. Once you've entered Darkmoon Island, you'll want to enter the fair proper and locate the carousel. Speak to the nearby panda named Katie and purchase a carousel ride ticket in order to sit on the carousel and receive a 10% experience buff. You're able to stack this buff up to a duration of 1 hour, and although it expires on death, you can return to the fair and refresh it as many times as you'd like. In order to enter Jade Forest, you'll first need to pick up a quest in Orgrimmar or Stormwind, depending on your faction. You'll then be directed to fly onto a nearby airship and speak with an NPC that teleports you directly to Pandaria. The start of Jade Forest is one of the few sections of MoP leveling where Horde and Alliance players encounter distinct differences. Horde players begin in the northwestern corner of Jade Forest, while Alliance players end up towards the south portion of the zone. The initial quests follow a similar trend where you attack an outpost of the opposing faction, with some small differences such as Alliance players piloting a gyrocopter and Horde players firing a machine gun. Although I won't explicitly cover launch day tips within this guide, it would be remiss of me to not mention how horrible these quests can be if you're doing them alongside multiple players. Competing for mob tags in a crowded area is rough at the best of times, but these initial quests are an absolute nightmare. If you have the entire zone to yourself, I'd consider the start of Jade Forest to be relatively efficient, but this is rarely the case in reality, and so it ends up feeling very slow. Unfortunately, things only get worse from here, as Jade Forest features a ton of extremely lengthy roleplay quests midway through the storyline. I know that many people find these quests to be fun, and I'll admit, the sniper rifle sections are fairly entertaining, but it should go without saying that these extended roleplay sections are horrendous for leveling efficiency. Now, as for Horde players, most of these roleplay-heavy quests will take place in Gruken Hill. However, you'll usually want to abandon the questline a bit earlier. After starting in Honeydew Village and heading down south, there's a lot of good quests in this portion of the zone, but you'll meet up with Lorewalker Cho around this little mountain here, and this is where you should jump ship. Alliance players have it a little bit better, as they can do all the quests in and around Podon Village before reaching Pearlfin Village, and there's a lot of stuff leading up to this. Lorewalker Cho is actually a side quest here, so you don't need to do them immediately, but upon reaching this town, you'll get those aforementioned roleplay heavy quests, and you should ditch the Jade Forest campaign entirely. However, it's not all doom and gloom, because some of the best quest hubs in Jade Forest don't actually require the main campaign as a prerequisite. The best example of this is Tian Monastery, up in the north. This subzone is fantastic. It is by far the best part of Jade Forest, and I would say that it's up there as one of the best questing hubs in the entirety of Mists of Pandaria. The fairly isolated location of this hub is a little bit unfortunate, because it can be very hard to actually get here during your first leveling run, but this becomes especially good on alts once you get flying, and the terrain and travel time is no longer a concern. In my opinion, Tian Monastery and the aforementioned starting quests are the only things that you should ever consider doing in Jade Forest. After this point, you should try to spam dungeons until you reach level 86, because Valley of the Four Winds is significantly better. However, if you really can't get into dungeons and you're still looking to find somewhere to quest, the Arboretum is a nice little hub that doesn't require the main campaign as a prereq, and the same thing applies for Nectar Breeze Orchard down in the south, although obviously this particular hub is a bit of a hike for Horde players. Hopefully by now you understand why I generally recommend dungeon spamming from 85 to 86. However, before we move on to the next zone, I want to touch upon an important topic that applies to MoP questing as a whole, that being treasures and rare mobs. Scattered throughout every zone in Pandaria, you'll encounter various treasures that grant a large chunk of experience if you collect them. Although you can only personally collect each treasure a single time, many of them have near-instant respawn timers, so they can be easily collected by any number of players. That being said, there's a handful of treasures that are considered rare and have a very long respawn timer, so you'll need to compete with other players if you want to find them. I won't be discussing the latter treasures in this video, as you're unlikely to encounter any while leveling, but I will be going over all of the important treasures in each zone that anyone is able to grab. Additionally, I'd highly recommend downloading an add-on called Handy Notes, as this will display the locations of every treasure on your map. There's a similar add-on called Rare Scanner that displays the location of every rare mob that you can encounter in Pandaria. Unfortunately, as the name implies, these mobs have a multi-hour respawn timer, so you probably won't find many of them on your way to level 90. If you do happen to spot a rare mob, which is indicated by a star icon on your minimap, then it's always worth taking a detour to try and kill them. Rares not only give a large chunk of experience, they also drop a guaranteed piece of gear and have an additional small chance to drop a super rare item such as a toy, a pet, or a BOE item. I won't be reviewing the location of every rare in this video, but make sure to keep your eyes peeled for them as you level up. Unfortunately, Jade Forest is extremely lopsided when it comes to treasures. Horde players have it good. There's 3 really good treasures in a small area: Lucky Pandaren Coin, Ancient Pandaren Teapot, and Pandaren Ritual Zone, all near their starting location of Honeydew Village. Alliance players, on the other hand, only have 1. That is Offering of Remembrance just north of Podon Village, and to add insult to injury, this gives less experience than any of the Horde treasures. Now, obviously, Alliance players still technically can grab the Horde treasures if they want to, but that is a really long hike when you could just do quests or dungeons instead. As a final note, there is technically another treasure south of Gruken Hill, but this one gives pitiful amounts of experience, and I would recommend avoiding it. Upon reaching level 86, you should immediately ditch Jade Forest and travel west to reach Valley of the Four Winds. This next level is rather unique, as it's the only point during MoP leveling where you technically have 2 zones to choose from. Krasarang Wilds appears to be another level 86 zone to the south, but this is a bit misleading. There's extensive crossover in the questlines between both zones, and although there are a few chains entirely contained within Krasarang, you can generally view it as a very large subsection of Valley. Also, just to briefly touch upon dungeons, although you can continue spamming during this level, and it will be reasonably efficient, you'll usually be better off questing in Valley and Krasarang, as these zones are a massive step up from the mess that is Jade Forest. Now, in the case of Valley, you have a few different options because unlike Jade Forest, it's a lot less linear. The main quest hub starts here in Pangstead, and this will follow Chen and Lili on their journey throughout the zone. They'll pass through Thunderfoot Fields and eventually end up in Half Hill, and culminate in a dungeon quest for Stormstout Brewery. Generally speaking, although I think that the quests within Pangstead are good, I avoid doing the entirety of this chain because there is a lot of roleplay and travel time as you follow Chen and Lili down the roads. There's also a set of side quests down in the Silken Fields that I usually avoid because I just don't find it to be very efficient. One of the most notable parts of this zone that many people will remember is that you can get your own farm in the town of Half Hill, and you can pick these quests up without any prereqs, and this is a good way to start gaining experience while you build your farm for use at endgame. I don't necessarily think that the quests to set up your farm are extremely efficient leveling-wise, but you'll probably want to get this for gold making, so it's 2 birds with 1 stone. Now, as for the really good stuff, Pools of Purity is maybe my single favorite quest hub in the entirety of Pandaria. It's a ton of really dense quests in a small area, what's not to love? Over in the west, although there is some travel time required to get here, both the quests in Stoneplow and Nessingwari Safari are extremely efficient, and I would generally recommend doing both of these hubs in their entirety. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Krasarang Wilds is more or less a big subzone of Valley. The first time you'll head down here is a breadcrumb quest in Pangstead, which directs you towards the town of Zoo's Watch. Although I'm personally not a big fan of Krasarang Wilds, as I feel that on average it's slower than most of the quest hubs in Valley, this particular hub is very good, and I usually like to complete it before moving on to Western Valley of the Four Winds. You'll also find a handful of quests around Thundercleft for Horde, or the Incursion for Alliance, and as far as the chains in Krasarang goes, these are about the best that you'll get. Usually, I find that I've gotten enough experience to reach level 87 by doing other stuff in Valley of the Four Winds before either of these are necessary, but they're not bad alternatives if you really want to quest in the zone. Beyond that, I really don't like the rest of Krasarang. There's a few quests down in Nyeli Lagoon, there's some quests in Crane Ring Refuge, Dawn Chaser Retreat for Horde, and Sentinel Base Camp for Alliance. I feel like a lot of these require way too much travel time, and the general density is just not there compared to all of the other options that you have. Now, on the topic of treasures, things are a little bit weird in Valley and Krasarang, because although there are a decent amount located in the zone, some of them require flying to access, so you won't really be able to do them on your first run. Great example of this would be the Vermin Treasure Cache, which is high up on a cliff, so you will not be able to reach this early on. In fact, the only true treasures that you will reliably be able to get in these zones is this thing, Sarok's Stone Tablet, which is technically speaking in Krasarang. You'll get it while doing the quest in Zoo's Watch. Although it's not showing up properly on my map, there is an item called Boat Building Instructions all the way off on the shore over here, and although it's a little bit of a detour, you can usually jump off a cliff, grab it, and then head over to Zoo's Watch when you're doing that part of the chain. After reaching level 87, you'll want to head up to Kun Lai Summit, but that's all the way up in the north, and in order to get there, you'll need to take a path through the Veiled Stair. You'll want to travel to this flight point west of Thunderfoot Fields and pick up the quest from the nearby Grummel. You'll then be taken up a winding path into the Veiled Stair, and this zone actually has 2 treasures that you'll want to grab before you travel to Kun Lai. The first is the Hammer of Folly in the eastern section of the zone, which can be found at the top of a path that ends in a cliff. The next one can be found here inside the Tavern in the Mists on the top floor, and although it doesn't give as much experience as a normal treasure, it's still worth picking up as you pass through. It's worth noting that although there are a few isolated quests in the Veiled Stair, I would generally recommend skipping them as they don't tend to be efficient. Upon reaching the northern part of the zone, you'll take a boat ride through the Ancient Passage and end up in Kun Lai Summit. Kun Lai is where Pandaria questing really gets good. Pretty much every single quest hub in the entirety of this zone is worth completing. You'll start off down south in Banan Village, and the questline will eventually direct you up to settle a town of either Eastwind Rest for Horde or Westwind Rest for Alliance. It's important to note, though, that there's a slightly obscured side quest chain over in Inkgil and this is really good, and you should definitely complete it before leaving Banan Village. From here, the zone opens up and gives you a choice of multiple different quest hubs, and you should complete all of them. The order in which you do this, though, doesn't really matter. Initially, it's important that you complete all of the quests around your faction's camp, and I generally prefer to start by going to the east and do quests around the Yongle Advance before heading up to the Temple of the White Tiger. The quest chain here is particularly notable, and it's one that you need to absolutely make sure you complete, as it'll direct you back down south and allow you to unlock the Veil of Eternal Blossoms. This is where your faction's major cities are, Shrine of the Two Moons for Horde and Shrine of the Seven Stars for Alliance, so it's very important that you get this unlocked ASAP, as it contains a lot of very important endgame NPCs that you'll need upon reaching level 90. Next, I like to go to the town of One Keg, and this once again branches off into multiple smaller hubs. One chain will send you way up north to Zalchin Village, another will send you up into the mountains south of the Peak of Serenity, and one will send you further along the Burlap Trail towards Kota Base Camp. Although, like I said, all of these quest hubs are fantastic, I would generally avoid doing Zalchin Village on your very first playthrough, as there's a lot of travel time required to get there if you don't have flying. After reaching Kota Base Camp and completing the quests in this part of the zone, there's 2 final hubs remaining in Kun Lai Summit, and they are by far the most important. Shadowpan Fallback to the south and Winter's Blossom to the north are, as you might imagine, related to the Shadowpan, which is one of the major endgame factions in Mists of Pandaria. The reason why this is important is because doing these quest hubs will also grant you a large amount of reputation with that associated faction, and this will be very important in the endgame. Oftentimes, because of how many good quest hubs there are in Kun Lai Summit, you may find yourself staying here well past 88, and that is totally okay. There's a few iffy quest hubs in Townlong Steppes, so by doing more stuff in Kun Lai, you're able to skip the inefficient parts of the next zone. After reaching level 87, you'll also unlock 2 new options in the Random Dungeon Finder, that being Shadowpan Monastery and Mogushan Palace. However, you should not run any dungeons at all at this point, even to complete the single-time quests. And if Kun Lai wasn't good enough, it also has the most treasures out of any of the leveling zones. For starters, there's the Terracotta Head, which you'll find while questing around Westwind or Eastwind Rest. It's located in this section of a bunch of Mogu, and this one can be a little bit tricky to find because there's other non-interactable terracotta heads in the ground, so it kind of blends in. The Sprite's Cloth Chest gives less experience than a regular treasure, but it's located along a traditional questing hub in the back of this cave, so when you happen to be doing quests around the Yakwash, you can just grab this before continuing along the chain. Similarly, in the back of the cave north of One Keg, you'll find the Stolen Sprite Treasure. Normally, you'll encounter the Ancient Mogu Tablet treasure on your way towards Zhaoqin Village, but even if you aren't questing in that hub, I would recommend grabbing this as it's not that long of a detour. While questing up north in the mountains, you'll encounter a Hosen tomb that has a small chest containing Riktik's tick remover. When you're questing along the Burlap Trail, in one of the caves you may encounter the Hosen treasure cache. When questing in the mountains west of Kota Base Camp, you can find a bag called the Lost Adventurer's Belongings. And finally, if you decide to quest in Zhaoqin Village, there's a large pond in the eastern section of the subzone, and at the bottom of it you'll find the statue of Swen. After reaching level 88 and finishing all of the good quest hubs in Kun Lai Summit, you'll enter Townlong Steppes, and you get here after picking up a breadcrumb quest towards the end of the Winter's Blossom subzone. The primary quest chain in this zone starts with Longying Outpost in the north, and then loops around to Hatred's Vice, Gaoran Battlefront, and Rensai's Watchpost before culminating with some quests in Sick Vis. I would always recommend doing this general loop around the zone, as not only is it relatively efficient, it also gives a bunch of Shadowpan rep, so once again, this will be important for level 90. There are some quests over in Nizhao Temple, and there is a small chain over in the Sump Rushes that I would recommend avoiding, as neither one of these is particularly efficient. Also, while testing in the beta, I'm not 100% clear whether or not Shadowpan dailies will actually be unlocked immediately. Normally they're tied behind the Golden Lotus reputation, but Blizzard did say in a blue post that in Classic they're going to be available independently of that faction. So there is a chance that the Shadowpan dailies are available as you level up, and if that's the case, it would be worth doing them. But we don't know that for sure, so I'm not going to factor that into the guide. Now, like I said before, since some of the quest hubs here aren't very good, you're ideally hoping to get to 89 purely by doing this main chain and the extra quests that you finished in Kun Lai Summit. If this is not the case and you're still at level 88, this is a good time to do dungeons. At this level, you'll unlock the final two dungeons that you'll get during the leveling process, Gate of the Setting Sun and Siege of Nizhao Temple. Although Gate of the Setting Sun is a relatively fast dungeon, Siege of Nizhao Temple is notorious for having the long roleplay gong section, which is really slow and inefficient. The main reason why it's not a terrible idea to do dungeons to finish off the remainder of 88 is because you still haven't done the one-time quest from Shadowpan Monastery and Mogushan Palace. Also, level 88 is the point at which Stormstout Brewery and Temple of the Jade Serpent get bumped out of the pool. You could choose to queue for these dungeons as you quest throughout Townlong Steppes, or you could do the entire quest chain first and only queue for them if you find yourself falling short of 89. Ultimately, the choice is yours. Also, as far as treasures go, Townlong has a few. There's one up north here, the Abandoned Crate of Goods. This one is a bit of a detour, but it's probably still worth getting. Despite how it may seem in the map, the Amber Encased Moth is actually down south in these trenches here. You'll get it while doing quests at the Gaoran Battlefront. And the Hardened Sap of Krives is an interesting one because it can either be really easy or really hard to get depending on its spawn location. If it spawns in the east of Krives, you can usually pick it up while doing quests around this area, but there's a chance that it spawns west up on a cliff and you won't be able to reach it easily without flying. Finally, there's a treasure called the Fragment of Dread located inside of this cave, and you're meant to encounter it while doing quests in the Zhao Temple, but since I avoid doing those, you probably won't run into it. If you're looking for something to do while queuing for dungeons, you could take a detour into this cave just to grab the treasure, as it is a nice chunk of experience. Finally, we've reached the Dread Wastes, which, like Kun Lai, is a fantastic leveling zone, and you'll be aiming to do almost all of it. The entry point for this zone is a little bit weird though, as it's actually all the way up here along the Serpent Spine wall. Getting here may seem difficult, but there's actually a quest offered by most Flight Masters in Townlong Steppes, Dread Wastes, and the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, which will give you a breadcrumb and then unlock the flight point automatically, so that you can fly over to this section of the wall and begin the chain. When it comes to questing in Dread Wastes, I have very little to say. You'll start by completing quests in the Terrace of Girthon, and you'll very quickly unlock the Klaxi faction. Like I said before with the Shadowpan, since this is an endgame faction, you want to do basically every quest you can in order to get rep with them, as this will help you later on at level 90. The only quest chain that you'll usually want to skip is the one down south in Sagi's Gamble. While some of these quests aren't terrible, a lot of them are underwater, so you'll get a lot of Vashir PTSD, and most of them don't give Klaxi rep, so it's generally not worth doing while leveling. On the flip side, you will get a quest that sends you up to the Sunset Brew Garden, and although this initially doesn't give Klaxi rep like Sagi's Gamble, it branches off into a bunch of really efficient chains that then link back up with the main Klaxi storyline, and these are really good quests, so I would definitely recommend doing everything in the northern section of Dread Wastes. As far as treasures go, Dreadwaste is the only zone that doesn't have any universal treasures that all players can grab. It's instead notorious for having a bunch of the ultra-rare treasures that people need to compete for, but it is worth noting that these are very, very strong. If you manage to find one of these, it's a 450 item level BOA weapon, and this is obviously very good not just for your initial leveling process, but also for leveling any alts, since they have an item level requirement of 86. As a final note, I generally wouldn't recommend doing any dungeons from 89 to 90, as, once again, this zone is incredibly efficient and you will need to pretty much 100% it at endgame regardless, and also all of the dungeons at this point are usually inefficient, so unless you still need to do the one-time quest for Gate of the Setting Sun, I wouldn't even bother queuing for dungeons, and even that is a bit of a stretch. If you found this video helpful, I'd encourage you to subscribe and toss it a like, as that'll help other people find it as well.